Hey, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to get set up here so I can share my screen with you. Well, good afternoon. As I'm getting set up here on my end, I'm excited to do this presentation with everybody today. It's a presentation that's actually very near and dear to my heart. I started it a couple of years ago, kind of evolving what I'd like it to become and what it should actually look like. And I think that over the last few months, I've really helped find a way to engage folks, even on this Zoom format, to really try to figure out how we can talk about leadership, especially during pandemic COVID times that we're having right now, recession times that we're having right now. So I'm excited to share this with everyone today. I know this is obviously usually a very funny time slot, end of the day. If we were all together, I would usually say, I appreciate you staying with me because you have a couple of other options that you could be doing right now, and that's either getting ready to fight rush hour or getting ready to go to happy hour. So at the end of the day, I want to try to keep this as fun as possible, as engaging as possible, and get you really excited to learn a couple of new things having to do and really revolve around leadership that I'm excited about. So I see more and more people are coming on right now. I also want to, it's some house cleaning type things. Please, you'll see it in the chat, but if you haven't turned on your chat yet, we want to make sure that you use the Q&A session for questions. We are going to take questions at the end, the last 10 minutes. I know I'm going to get a reminder when we're there. I'm going to ask everybody as we go along with this session to please remember that we're going to utilize the chat function. So if you go up and you click on the chat, we're going to try to utilize the chat a little bit throughout this presentation as well. It's really the only way I have to engage with everybody. It's a lot harder when you're on this format and you try to get the crowd a little excited or laughing a little bit. And all I can do is look at the chat and hope for the best. I will today attempt or try to attempt to make you laugh or at least ear to ear smile. So please be considerate of these efforts. I promise you, they would land nicely if we were in person. But let's get going because I know we have a lot to cover in a very short amount of time, and I appreciate all the people who've jumped on to participate this afternoon. I really want to start really quickly with a quick bio. I know some of you have seen me before. I know I presented earlier. I gave a different bio then, but just a little bit about me. I'm actually running my third organization. It's the Grace Point Foundation. It is the philanthropic arm of a very large behavioral health organization called Grace Point, which does mental health, addiction services, homeless services. The foundation itself is small. We only have 2 people on the foundation and then a part-time financial bookkeeper as well. So this is my third opportunity to run an organization. All 3 times I was the executive director / development director, like many of you. So I do a lot of my responsibilities weigh heavily in the fundraising realm as well. I'm excited to talk about leading with empathy, gratitude, and action because I think we're in a unique time here today with everything that's going on in our country, whether it's racial justice, dealing with inequity, talking about gender pay gap, talking about leadership, gender gap there, talking about salary gap, talking about all these things that we need to work on more and more in the nonprofit sector, calling them out, bringing them to light, and dealing with them. And I think leadership has a lot to do with this. And so there's never been a greater time for us to understand how important it is to lead with empathy and gratitude, but more importantly, we have to act on that. We have to remember, empathy and gratitude and action can be deployed as a member of a team or as a team leader. You don't have to be the executive director to showcase these things in an organization. I have several goals that I usually like to do with this when we're together, but I tried to narrow it down to just 3 today for the call. And that's really a better understanding of how to lead with empathy, gratitude, and action. Strategies leaders can implement to meet the needs of their workforce. And their workforce is a varying range. Some people have a lot of employees. Some people are total volunteer workforce. So we want to make sure that this applies both to paid employees and volunteers as well. And in steps to address issues and concerns that employees have. And employees have a lot of concerns these days with employee engagement and job satisfaction and job retention. We see a lot of people turning over in jobs all the time, especially with smaller nonprofits, because there's not the things that they'd like to see in those organizations, which have to do with organizational culture, which have to do with benefits. Sometimes it has to do with salary. So we really have to look at how can we as leaders today at all levels, what can we do to make our organizations better? And that's what this workshop is for. One of my favorite slides to share really has to do with what we need to do to move out of our comfort zone as leaders. Generational leadership is obviously something that has very distinct markers to it. We know what boomer leaders, how they were raised. We know how Gen X leaders, that's my generation, how we were raised. But 75% of the workforce today in the United States is millennial or Gen Z. They expect something different in the office, very different than when I first started out. And so to do that, when I work with leadership or executives or boards or corporate groups, I always put this slide up because there's a certain amount of comfort we all have with what we've always done. But if we know we want to get to the next level, we have to make sure that we start working our way outside that comfort zone till we get to the point to where our leadership is where we really would want it to be. And what does that look like? You know, we want to be able to be effective leaders. We want to be inspiring and charismatic leaders. We want to be leaders that attract top talent, leaders that push our organizations forward. And that can be done a lot of ways. But before any of that can be done, we really need to address where we are in our comfort level with how we respond to our employees, how do we engage with our volunteers, and how we work with those groups that help make our organizations better. So I like to tell everyone we all lead in a number of ways. We're all leaders in some form or fashion. We lead our staff, our committees, our volunteers, our donors, our board members, our stakeholders. You're not just a leader because your title says you're a leader. In fact, hardly anyone's title actually has the word lead or leadership in it. We see executive director, we see CEO, we see vice president, we see director of development, we see manager of something, but we never see leadership. That's why we have to know that leadership really is across all levels. And we have to know that we have the ability to lead amongst a number of different groups. And I just named a number of them there. I believe leaders today have responsibility of really and truly honestly being the culture caretakers within their organization. And what does that mean? You don't usually use the word caretaker and have it mean something easy or something that doesn't require a lot of work. Caretakers really take on the task of really getting the most involved in doing the work that needs to be done. We always talk about hiring for culture fits, or we talk about finding people that are going to fit our work team culture, our organizational culture, or we recruit board members or committee members because we're trying to have a good culture fit. And it really is amongst us as the leaders of our organizations to figure out what we have to do to be the caretakers of that. And sometimes that's messy work. And it requires showing you that last slide where you have to get out of your comfort zone and get into that fear zone, what you need to do to make that work possible. So there's a lot of great leadership that I use diagrams and charts from the Center of Creative Leadership that really help illustrate this. So what are those 4 core fundamentals of leadership? And I think for a lot of us, we see nowadays when you talk about self-awareness, you talk about communication, influence and learning, agility, maybe those 4 things are a lot different than what we were raised in our last couple of years. And all that really is the ability and willingness to learn from experience and then apply that learning successfully to perform in a new situation. And that was something that's really just come up over the last couple of years, but it's so important because we've seen as leaders, we have to pivot from all these crucial things that we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with how to take care of our employees and still provide productive services to the populations we serve through COVID. How do we go from everyone being in the office to everyone working remotely? How are we going from not understanding that we could do a flexible work schedule to understanding that a flexible work schedule is all we have to do now. Being self-aware, really understanding the behaviors of those in our organization. Just because we're at the top, we have to have empathy and understanding of what's going on at all levels, because this pandemic has hit everyone differently. This recession that we are in is hitting everyone differently. So we really have to understand that core leadership skills today look a lot different than maybe they did 5 or 10 years ago. As leaders, we have control on whether or not to deploy empathy and gratitude when feelings and emotions are expressed. But to do so requires action. Now, I hear this a lot. We hear the word empathy so much when you talk about leadership at all levels, whether it's the nonprofit level, the education level, the corporate level. We hear the word empathy a lot. It really has become a buzzword for leadership, but we have to understand really what that means. And I think we understand it the most, especially in the social service world, because having empathy is really wondering what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes and understanding that. So we get empathy, I think, a little bit better than most. But we also, one thing that I see a lot of leaders struggle with is gratitude and recognition, and understanding that staff morale is low right now. It's low for a lot of reasons, especially low in the mental health, behavioral health, homeless field that I'm in, because a lot of people are suffering right now. Mental health professionals are seeing a lot. And some estimates are saying we're seeing about 3-4 years of work in the last 7 or 8 months. So we're having to be really cautious and careful in our own organization in making sure that we understand and display some of that empathy, and definitely express some of that gratitude to the people in the trenches doing the really hard work. So we started a really robust recognition program to help build morale up, because I know traditional Employee of the Month programs are great, but that means only 12 people get recognized throughout the year. We have 620 employees working in our organization, so recognizing 12 out of 620 doesn't really do a lot. So we've really changed things enough and really started to step up our gratitude. And now we're recognizing somewhere between 10 and 14 employees a month. And that is really making a difference, because employees like to see other employees doing well and getting recognized for their work. So that gratitude buildup has been really crucial internally. And then for the foundation, we've really started to really ramp it up externally as well with our donors, and really sharing with our donors just how much their support has meant to us, and what we've been able to do with that support. And so really those two things I think are becoming really important to speak to leadership, but usually the key missing piece is that word action. It's one thing to have empathy for somebody. It's another thing to give recognition and gratitude. But sometimes for leaders, we have to act. Having empathy just isn't enough. And if there's somebody in your organization that's making it worse for others, we have to act on that. And sometimes that means we have to find who that toxic person in our organization is, and maybe they're not the right fit for our organization. So leadership does require a fair amount of action to it, or it's not true leadership. Some good tips for effective communication when you talk about leadership, and it really is essential to leadership development, is how we communicate effectively. And again, this is another great slide I have from the Center of Creative Leadership. And it's really, communication is the core of what we do. Most people, especially the ones that are, if they're volunteers, especially if there are frontline staff, we have very few moments where we have true engagement and true communication with them. So we have to make sure we utilize and take those times and really make sure our communication is clear, it's effective, it's simple, and it's impactful. And that's how we're going to be able to really produce the results that we want to have in our organization. So when it says things like communicate relentlessly, there's been no greater time than now that needs to happen. I know myself, I'm at home right now, like so many of you. We've had to switch from maybe going in the office to working remotely, or being at home, or doing a combination or a hybrid of both. And so communications becomes so important now, because we don't see each other. We don't have that connectiveness with each other. And so sometimes if you're having a bad day, we're not seeing those cues, especially on a Zoom call. Right now, the only picture I see is Vince, and it's a static picture of him smiling. So it's really hard for me right now to really feel that if this was a team, I'd be getting my point across. So we really have to understand that we have to communicate relentlessly with our teams, with our boards, with our staff, with our volunteers, and that's what's going to make us the most effective leadership through this very challenging time. You know, holding your thoughts, using stories, these are all so important. I think we realize we connect more with everybody, both internally and externally, when we use stories. I have found that the moment I started using stories in my donor communications, things really changed for the better for my organization. It no longer was just about data. It no longer was about the number of people served. It was no longer about the number of population in a program that we had more than the year before. It ended up really becoming, let's talk about the impact we've had on people's lives, or the impact that staff has had on somebody. And we utilize stories to really share what we're able to do, and our donors and our staffs connected more with it. Nonprofit sector is currently experiencing an unprecedented amount of all these things. And before COVID hit, we were already experiencing this. Now that COVID hit, there's so many people that are experiencing furloughs, so many people that have been gone from full-time to part-time. There's been very little program succession as programs have been cut. So we have to understand and really take on as leaders and understand the landscape that we're in. And if we have unhappy workers, and if we have low employee engagement, and if we've had a lot of development staff turnover, we need to be able to address that with the right strategies that are effective to move our organizations to the place we want them to go. So we have to look at recruitment and retention. There's a lot going on here. What do employees and volunteers really, really want from an organization? They want to work for an organization where their mission and their values truly align. I did not think I'd come back to run another small nonprofit organization, but I have a tremendous amount of personal alignment with the mission of my organization that's made this opportunity, this third opportunity, a much better opportunity for me than probably the last two. Even though I did have a lot of success at the last two and raised a lot of money, I actually feel like I'm having more of an impact with this one because of that connection. We also want to make sure our mission and values align with our personal values and offer opportunities for our employees to pursue other interests. I always talk to a lot of groups that say they're having low employee morale. And I said, have you ever thought of taking your employees and having some type of philanthropic project you can do together? And everyone usually says the same thing, like, but we're the charity. And I'm like, well, that's okay. I mean, you guys can still do great work, but sometimes it's good to get out in the community and do some different types of things that can help bring your group together and have that volunteer time where you guys can connect on a different level than you would at work. And you can do that out on a project somewhere in your community. So just understanding some of these things, I think, are super important. What employees want. We like to say we're recruiting top talent. I like to say top talent is recruiting us. So we have to know what they like, and then we have to lead accordingly to that. So what does today's workforce really want? So what do leaders have to be ready for? I think today's workforce wants a lot of things, and some of those things are much different than what we wanted. I turned 46 years old a few weeks ago, and I know for me, so early in my career, it was all about salary and title. Always about those two things. I've jumped for positions that made like just a couple thousand more than I was making because I always saw the grass was greener because the salary changed or the title changed. That's very different today. And we have to understand, if we're going to be effective leaders and communicate with our staff and improve engagement and improve recruitment, we have to understand what they are looking for. And all the research is showing that big 75% of the population, that population that's volunteering way more hours than we ever did growing up, that group that's actually living to work and not working to live, They want access to technology, a positive work culture, opportunities to advance, professional development, coaching and mentoring, mental health and wellness. There's a huge subset of millennials and Gen Z who have left an organization that they said had a negative impact on their mental health. That's never been done before in the generational work studies in the past. It's only happening now, so we're really taking into account those types of things. So what do they mean? What is our effective communication going to do? And before we get into the strategies, I'm just building context for why we have to do these strategies. And that's this diagram right here really is building our way and engaging our way to a trust relationship. As a leader, and we've all had managers, we've all had bosses. I think we've all had those experiences at a job in the past where it just wasn't a good fit for us. It affected us or impacted us maybe mentally. We didn't enjoy the work. We knew we had to leave sooner or later. And so when I coach managers or first-time people supervisors, I always like to say we have to work our way to a trust level with our folks. And we have to start by being engaged in forming real relationships. And that can actually happen over video chat. You just have to know the right things to ask, and you have to be able to understand that you can form a relationship with teams even when you're not in the office together, and really understand where people are and where they want to go as individuals. So understanding that we're always trying to get to that trust in the middle, and understanding that that takes work, and that also takes some time. So let's dive into the actual practices. I like to say sometimes there's always just not best practices out there. There's more evolving practices and emerging practices, but I don't discount the best practices. I know some people say there's a lot of tried and true stuff, but we have to understand it's not just best anymore. Sometimes what's best for me isn't best for you, but you can take a practice that you learned from a training today and incorporate it into your organization, and it can have some impact if it evolves the way that you want it to evolve that works best for you. So we develop content that builds relationships with potential people, potential volunteers, potential employers, and that's what's going to help strengthen it as we talk to each other and work together. And that's the exciting thing about leadership. It can evolve. It's not just one size fits all. I think there's a great quote from Simon Sinek that has to go with being a leader isn't about being in charge of people. It's about taking care of those people in your charge. And that's truly what it is. And that's what servant leadership is. And we hear that term a lot. And we know leadership has shifted from telling everybody what to do to empowering others to do their work. And that looks a lot like this. You know, how do we empower somebody? I mean, we're told that all the time as leaders, to be empowering, to be empowering, to be encouraging, to get people to get to a level on their own without having to micromanage them or without having to constantly hover over them. And we know that means a lot of things. That means we have to become a lot of things for our staff and our volunteers. And we have to do a lot of listening, and we have to do a lot of teaching, mentoring. And sometimes that requires us, if we're going to have empathy, to be vulnerable. And if someone shares something that's happened to them, for them to know that something similar might have happened to you can help create a better connection between the two of you, to where they, when they start to feel better, can work even harder for you. And this is what it means to become a servant leader. It's that we are here, we're at the top to make everyone else look better and make everyone else be better. Servant leadership is another thing we've heard a lot about over the last few years. And I think the hardest part about understanding the importance of servant leadership is that it's much different than just being the kind of leader who dictates what things need to happen and then waits for you to either to fail or succeed on those things that they've dictated without any help, context, or support. So servant leadership really looks at all these different things, understanding they're focused on others, not themselves. They're motivated to make life better for others, not just themselves. Again, it's always about taking care of those in your charge. It's about understanding there's key factors to what a servant leader is. And you see empathy in there, of course, and awareness and healing, and all these different things commitment to growth, all these things that we know our staffs need today that still, despite what research says, despite what we have a comfort level to do, we still have to practice it all the time to be good at it. You can't just be really good at thinking one person you have a better relationship with and then leave everybody else out. You really have to learn how to practice it across all levels of your organization. And for volunteers, it couldn't be more important. And I know there's a lot of people that really need that volunteer engagement for your organizations. Yeah, they're the lifeblood of our organization. Sometimes we can't afford staff or don't have the budget to afford staff. And this still applies for employees and volunteers, because volunteers, as long as you make them feel good about their commitment to your organization and that their time was impactful and worthwhile, they will always be the best thing that ever happened to your organization. So let's talk about ways to succeed as a leader. Again, another great graphic from the Center of Creative Leadership. I use these guys a lot to stay consistent when I talk about leadership. But when you look at 6 ways to succeed as a leader, you're going to see some themes that keep coming up over and over again. We talk about leading employees and what that actually means. We've talked about self-awareness a little bit. We've talked about employee development. And employees come into an organization, I think they would come in because they want to make an impact. They don't come in right away and say they want to run the organization in 6 months, but they definitely want to be developed as employees. And I think the fear for the longest time for nonprofits is that if we develop our employees, or if we spend time, money, or resource developing our employees, then what if they leave? And I think we have to start thinking to ourselves, if we don't help develop them, what if they stay? I mean, is that really the kind of employee that we want to have? We want the best employees for our organizations. And so developing them really shows that we value them, whether it's volunteer or an employee. It really shows that we care about them. It really shows that we want to make them better and help them grow within our organization. So when it comes time to perhaps an offer to leave, they're going to remember the organization where they had the best work culture, where they had the best growth and development. And then that's what we want in our organization, is the best people. And sometimes that investment is very much well worth it. Leaders can empower employees by instilling in them belonging and competence. This is so important. I think it takes deploying empathy and gratitude to do this, but I think employees and volunteers really, truly feel connected to an organization when they have that sense of belonging there, and then they feel like we've given them the ability to take off and run something, and that's what gives them the confidence to lead. And that's an amazing thing to watch. When you've trained people and mentored a group of volunteers or employees, and you've watched them take off, and you've been able to take a step back, and you've set them up to have some spectacular opportunity and outcomes and success, it really is a great thing to watch. I think employees, employee feeling greater confidence in their individual ability is huge when this happens. And the overall ability of the organization to grow and have greater impact also happens. I think if we spend a lot of time as leaders saying one thing before every staff meeting, how can I instill a sense of belonging and competence in my employees or volunteers before I go into this meeting, is a great way to start every meeting for our mindset and what we want to accomplish, because we will see the growth we need to see. We will see the impact and the outcomes we need to see when we make that possible. Let's talk a little bit more about empathy. I think we hear it all the time. I've said it a couple of times now. Empathy really is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. And I think that's something that we do very well in the organizations that we work for, in this impact sector that we all belong to. Empathy means a lot. It's taking the perspective of someone and recognizing their perspective as truth. I think we have a hard time doing that sometimes with people not in our organizations or in the programs that we work with, but we really do a really good job internally doing them and just recognizing emotion in somebody else, recognizing connectiveness. I've seen this done with a lot of our homeless programs and social outreach programs we do at my organization. It really, empathy, I tell a lot of people, it really is a choice, and it's a choice we have to make to understand what's going on with the populations we serve, but also what's going on with our people. Right now, and I'll give a really good example. Obviously we're still doing a lot of remote working at my organization, much like many of yours. And my coordinator for my, for the Grace Point Foundation has been through a lot. And there's some good things, and there's things that have been really hard on her. Her baby's due next week, so we're really excited about that. I've tried to pay her $100 to name the baby after me. She wouldn't accept the money, so they already have another name picked out. But there's a lot of things that have been challenging for her that I've had to really displayed a lot of empathy in helping her get through some of these things. She lost her father back in February, and then her fiance lost his mother, who was living with them and they were taken care of 3 weeks later. And then she's taken on adopting her 10-year-old nephew. And so all of that going on personally, why we're still trying to figure out how we're going to operate as a small nonprofit, why we had to cancel our biggest fundraiser of the year, which really, like many of you, you've also had to do that, messed up our annual budget goals for the year. And then also a couple months later, her fiance was furloughed from his job. So, you have to look at the stresses of the people that work with you as well, not just the people you work for, and figuring out how you can support them through challenging times. And I know that being able to deploy empathy and being able to support her through some of these challenging moments over the last several months has really grown our relationship. We've worked actually closer together. We've actually gotten a ton done. We probably actually think we've gotten more done working remotely from home than we actually might have gotten done from the office. And it's really caused us to be in a really good place during a really challenging time. And it was because of this approach. And I know she's been appreciative of that I've been able to offer her. And it's really, I think, taken our organization to the next level, and just understanding that your people need your help just as much as the populations you serve. So how do you build a culture of empathy? What does that take? And I tell people, it takes a lot of things. I know you can do strategic plans. I know you can write inspirational quotes on a whiteboard. And I know you can say things that you can get you guys excited about, and really excited about the work that you do, the populations you serve, the mission impact that you have. But you got to be proactive, and it takes a lot of things. And sometimes it takes more questioning and more active listening than you're used to. And it takes modeling behavior for all your managers, if you're in a larger organization, to see how important it is. So I look at these 5 things here: asking questions, getting to know everyone, from the person at the job that you want 2-3 years from now, to the first job you ever had, and helping mentor that person as well. It takes getting to know everyone. It requires you to make people feel bigger than they are. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do in this nonprofit sector, especially with the populations we serve. But let's talk about doing that with our volunteers and our employees as well. Make them feel bigger than they are, so they see the impact that they're having, so they work with a level of competence that can only push our organizations forward. Modeling behavior. This is a hard one for so many people, because we hear all the time that we need to be more vulnerable and we need to give more and show more empathy. And I think all vulnerability really is in the workplace is just feeling comfortable enough to know that we can ask for help. It's not just walking around moping, saying I'm so vulnerable, and telling everybody what a bad day you're having. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability is knowing that you're safe in the workforce to take on a challenge, And if you need help, you know you can get it. And you can disclose it, you need help, and get it without any judgment, without any repercussions, without any action on you. I think knowing your organizations have your back and your leaders have your back is the least amount of things that we can do for you to support you as an employee. And encourage people to talk about their feelings about work. We deal with the hardest stuff. On any given day, I'm talking to somebody who has lost somebody, a family member, to suicide. I'm talking to somebody who's struggling with their recovery from addiction or alcoholism. I'm in our homeless services department. I'm figuring out how best we can support the clients that they have through those programs. So, and that's hard work. And we take that home with us. So we have to be able, when we're in our one-on-one meetings, when we're debriefing with the volunteer or with the key staff, be able to really see how they're doing, understand that they might need help, understand that we need to listen to them. And I think that's where the magic really happens when you talk about leading effectively, is just being willing to have those conversations, because you'll never know who you're keeping from possibly leaving if you did not have that conversation. And so that's the exciting thing about it. Gratitude. We see it all the time. It's more than just a thank you. Sometimes we need to recognize people in front of their peers. Sometimes we need to recognize people in front of a larger group, whether when we start getting back to a place where we have events. Sometimes it's good to recognize people publicly, whether that's on our websites, whether that's on social media, whether that's in our newsletter. There isn't really one of us that doesn't get excited about recognition, that doesn't feel a bit of pride when we feel and we get recognized. And if that's what I would consider the stepping stone to a better relationship with your volunteers and employees and committees and boards, that's an easy one to do, because we really and truly honestly need to basically display gratitude, what I would say on a daily basis, if not weekly basis, because right now with everyone struggling, you never know what you're going to say, how that's going to impact somebody to continue working for you and staying with your organization. So we got to focus on people, not just performance. I think the thing about gratitude, I think people default with are, let's say you're in the development office and you want a grant. And so you focus on winning a grant, and you're not focusing on the person who spent 3 months writing the grant. I think we need to acknowledge that, yeah, winning the grant is great, and those dollars are going to do good, and we'll be able to serve a unique population with those dollars. But let's look at the person who spent all their time writing it, and let's really appreciate how diligent they were to make it happen and how they represented the organization well. The same thing can go with sponsorships. The same thing can go with events. The same thing can go with programs as well. Let's look at the people, and I think we struggle sometimes looking at the people. And I think that would challenge everyone on this session today to really start looking at the people, not just the performance. Customize it. You got to customize it. It's got to be unique to you and your staff. One of the things when we were redoing our recognition program at the Grace Point Foundation is, we all don't have to have the ceremonies or the acknowledgments in the same way. We know we're busy. We know the value of people's time. We know when people are usually working, their time is usually pretty set of when they have opportunities and windows to take breaks. Not everyone has the ability to be part of a recognition ceremony. So I think as long as you make it personal and unique and special to the person that you want to give recognition to, if you can do that individually, that still works. Because if you can display that recognition with gratitude, if you can display that recognition in an authentic and genuine way, they're going to get just as much from it as if 4 other people from your organization were there to watch. So you can do it a number of different ways, and I encourage you to do it several ways. You can do it both online, in print, in person, but definitely understanding that recognition and gratitude is unique to everybody, and we need to take the time to do that. And then obviously it's specific to the individual. I think that there's some people doing some amazing things in our organizations that they've been doing for a long time. And we think we might not have the time because it's past to recognize them for their work. So let's recognize them for that work. I think there's lots of opportunities to say, you've been running this program for 10 years. We're going to name an award after you. And everyone that comes in and works in this program has the ability to win that award because you pioneered this work for our organization. So there's lots of ways to do it. This is a great slide and just giving you some opportunity to say how you can focus your gratitude. And I would encourage everyone to really take that opportunity to figure out how you can make it special, unique, and individualized to the person. We just got a couple more slides before we go into Q&A. This is one of the best graphics I found in terms of action. We talked a lot about empathy. We talked a lot about gratitude. But really the secret to all of this is action. If we don't act, then we will lose the best volunteers. Then we will lose the best staff. And we can't be surprised when that happens because it really requires action. All of these things that we've talked about today require action on a number of different levels. They can be in person, it can be in small group, it can be public, but it requires action. So action-centered leadership, ACL, is something I've heard about for a while. So I was always looking for just the right way to explain, what that missing piece actually is. And it's all those things that we've talked about. It's the performance, the accomplishment of the task. It's the individual and how do you empower them? And it's how do you build the team up? And how do you deploy gratitude to a team that's done some amazing work? So these are all ways to really understand how you can act today. You can go back to your organization, tomorrow and start deploying some of these things to let your teams and your volunteers know just how much they mean to you and the organization. This is one of the things I say all the time. A leader will not willing to act on organization's core values and mission will always lose the respect of employees and create a revolving door culture of employment. I think many of us have been there. Many of us have seen it. And the thing that inevitably causes low employee morale and promotes a toxic work culture is inaction. So the power of action is so important. You have to act. You can't just watch somebody else make other people's day miserable and then wonder when they leave why they left. And it's the same thing with donors. I've been a fundraiser for many years. If I have a donor that's making somebody in my organization feel bad and they're the toxic person in the organization, then I let them go. So we have to make sure that we act. Acting is more important in any way. The action we provide as leaders is what's going to connect us to our workforce. It's what's going to connect us to our volunteers. And then that's how our organizations are going to improve. And that's the loyalty they build with the leader when you can show that happens. So one of my favorite slides, and this is one we're going to end on. This is the last slide in the deck because I know we're coming up on the Q&A mark, is 4 factors that really drive employee engagement. This is what we want. This is what we're all struggling with right now through COVID and through all the obstacles that have come in our way over the last several months. Is how can we really drive employee engagement? And I think it starts, the base is organizational engagement. What does that mean? Well, let's incorporate a recognition program. You can do that across the organization. And let's recognize people on a consistent level. And then once we start recognizing people on a consistent level at all levels, then we can go to team engagement and start recognizing teams or departments that are doing amazing work or good work. Then I think we can go up one more level to job engagement. That's that individual engagement with people and letting them know how important they are to your organization and doing those things that we need to do to keep them. And then we get up to leader engagement. That is so important because if you're not willing to talk to all your staff as a leader, then I'm gonna say it right now. And I know we're coming up on Q&A and it might be the most controversial thing I say all day. Then maybe leadership is not for you. Being a leader requires you to engage on all levels with everybody and to be able to do some of these things. And although it might be outside our comfort zone, that's what today's employees need from us. And that's the challenge we have moving forward, no matter the time, whether it's COVID, whether it's recession, whatever the next thing is. These are the things that are going to help build our organization in a way that we can move forward together as leaders across the board. So that's my presentation today. I know we're right at the mark we wanted to be for Q&A. We've already got let's see, the Q&A chat, I believe, is up. Please, while we're going to move people from the web chat over to the Q&A chat. If you have any questions, I know I'm keeping some of you from dinner, or at least maybe binging on Netflix, whatever you like to do now that we're all at home right now. But I'll go ahead and read the first question. Looking at an entirely volunteer workforce, which do not have the advantage of seeing each other in the workplace, what tips do you have to project these behaviors probably? So an all volunteer workforce, super important. You don't see everybody every day. That's where, as a leader, you have the opportunity that you can actually deploy 3 things right away. 1, reaching out to each person individually by phone, not by email. Maybe set up a phone call or a Zoom call, but definitely find a chance to have them on a one-on-one and thank them for their work and talk about the impact they are having, just not their work performance. Individualize it to them. 2, make it a point to recognize their work to others. Sometimes that's letting people at the board level know what the people at the volunteer level are doing. And if you're not doing that, that's a great way to build a better idea of the impact of an organization when they hear those stories. And I think 3, I know a lot of us recognize donors on our websites or recognize donors on our annual reports. When it comes to an all volunteer staff, and I've done this before because I've helped be in program for all volunteer staff before, recognize those folks doing the volunteer work in those reports. I don't know too many people running to their mailbox to look at an annual report. I have one right here, and I don't even use the back of it for donors. I'll speak to on the inside. I'll speak to what some amazing work volunteers are doing, and I find more people that are connected to my mission and connected to the work we do, more interested in hearing why other people are connected. That really is how you engage your current donor base, and that is a great way to engage potential donors, sharing other people's connection. And that's the power volunteers have, and I hope that answers that question. Do we have any other questions as we get down to the last couple of minutes here? We're right at the 5-minute mark here. If anybody has another question, we do have opportunity to go ahead and put that in the Q&A. It's so hard when I can't see you guys. I want to stop sharing. I think right now, if you don't have a question, I'm happy to reach out to anybody. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I know a number of people have done so this morning. Ian Adair. I know you can find me on social media at Ian M. Adair. My middle name is Michael. It's easy to find me there. I know a lot of people have connected with me from this morning's session. You know, feel free to please send me a direct message or connect with me on LinkedIn. I had a couple of people ask me some questions offline. Happy to do that. But if anyone doesn't have any further questions, I know right now it's still open to ask. But the last couple of seconds here, you know, happy to sign off and give you back a couple more minutes to get ready for dinner. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share again. This is my third annual conference. I really, really wish I was there in person in Tahlequah. Most of you know, the ones that know me a little bit know, I'm from Oklahoma. I grew up in Stillwater. I still very much consider myself an Oklahoman, an Okie. I talk about it all the time. And I know it's a lot easier for me when I'm in Stillwater to wear orange and talk about going for the Pokes. But, you know, coming from Tampa, different time zone, I'm really hoping that this was an impactful session. I'm hoping this helps. I love it. Now we're starting to see the comments. Go Pokes, love it. I hope it helps. Please, again, feel free to reach out. I usually stay in contact with several people from this conference for several months as we go. I'm excited over my shoulder here. My book actually comes out next month. So I'm very excited about that. It's about mental health. So really excited to look forward to that. It's called Stronger Than Stigma. So a lot of things changing in my life I'm really excited about. And I just, want to thank the Cherokee Nation, Vince and Brad and everybody else, Tammy, that allowed me to come back for the third year and share with you guys. It's truly been an honor.